Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, Cuomo out. The embattled New York governor made a surprise announcement that he will step down.
The best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing.
The move following that bombshell Attorney General report detailing sexual harassment allegations. What's next for Cuomo? The ongoing impeachment investigation and the criminal complaints against him. Plus, the woman who will take over as governor. Full coverage this morning. At a breaking point, hospitals across the South stretched to the limit as the Delta variant continues to wreak havoc on largely unvaccinated areas. This morning, Mississippi now reporting there are 0 ICU beds available. The dire situation in one area hospital system where nurses are begging for help. Done deal breaking overnight. The Senate passed that massive $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, but without the support of Republicans. This just hours after passing the $1 trillion bipartisan bill. Major victories for the Biden administration, but a battle is brewing in the House over the future of both. We'll break down the hurdles that lie ahead. And bid it to win it. The real estate market heating up. Now, it's not just future homeowners who may have to get into a bidding war for that dream home. Demand for space is so high that even renters are battling it out for apartments. We'll take a closer look at this latest trend in pandemic-era home hunting. We both moved during this and had to deal with a little bit of that.
Yeah, I was on the flip side. I was when they were begging for renters.
You got the deal. I got kind of a deal, but we knew people were lining up behind us. It's always a stressful time. We'll get to that in a little bit, but we begin this morning with the news not only shaking New York, but sending shockwaves across the country. Governor Andrew Cuomo is resigning from office amid a cascade of sexual harassment allegations.
The three-term governor says he's stepping down in 2 weeks' time. The governor's announcement came 1 week after New York's Attorney General released a scathing report on those allegations, prompting politicians on both sides of the aisle to call for Cuomo's resignation.
I think that given the circumstances, the best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. And therefore, that's what I'll do.
The news in Albany overshadowed the president's victory lap at the White House yesterday. Reporters asked President Biden about the resignation, all while he was touting his signature infrastructure legislation passing in the Senate.
What impact, as the head of the party, what impact does his resignation have on the Democratic Party?
I think the impact is all on Andrew Cuomo and his decision to make that judgment, and I respect his decision.
Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul is now set to become the next governor of New York. She'll be the first woman ever to lead the Empire State.
The surprise resignation does not mean the legal and political fallout swirling around Governor Cuomo stop immediately. The New York State Assembly began an impeachment inquiry less than a week after that Attorney General report alleging sexual harassment was released. And there's no confirmation this morning of whether the process will stop when the governor steps down. In addition, one accuser has filed a criminal complaint regarding the governor's alleged behavior, an accusation he disputes. Here to break down the state of the criminal and legal issues following the governor are NBC News correspondent for investigations Tom Winter and Danny Ceballos, an NBC News legal analyst. We are lucky to have you both with us to break this down this morning. Thanks for being here. Tom, I will begin with you now. We don't need to think back very far to find an example of an impeachment inquiry moving forward despite the official in question being out of office already. Now that the governor says he's stepping aside, what happens to the Attorney General's work?
Well, their work from an investigative standpoint is over. The independent investigators, they're done. They have nothing else to do from as far as looking into anything else. The Attorney General's office will be interesting to see if anybody else comes forward, any other women come forward to talk about the governor's behavior or possibly his actions, whether or not they will continue to take a look at things there. But the bulk of their work is complete, except this morning, Savannah, you and I, the governor's attorneys and the lawmakers in New York State all have something in common. That is, we are waiting for the transcripts and the underlying documents from that independent report to be made public. And we should get that hopefully starting perhaps as soon as this week.
And Danny, Governor Cuomo's personal lawyer spoke yesterday to defend the governor. She spoke out against some of his accusers, and she even blasted that Attorney General report. First, let's listen.
What is shocking to me is that the Attorney General's report, which everyone is relying on and is saying is the Bible of truth here, got it wrong. There are omissions. They did not include critical evidence. And there are witnesses that they know lied to them and had credibility issues, and they didn't include that in the report.
So here we're getting a little hint at the way that they're planning to defend this. What do you think of the governor's building legal defense?
The governor's defense showed, starting on Friday, that the report is something that has not been subjected to the crucible of cross-examination or the adversarial process. It may be that everything in there is true, but it simply hasn't been essentially cross-examined. The defense team in a potential criminal case would do their own investigation. They would cross-examine witnesses. And we saw a glimpse of that on Friday. And we're seeing it with Ms. Glavin's interviews here. She's right. I mean, it is, as we say in the criminal defense business, only one side of the story.
And now, Tom, there is a criminal complaint, as I mentioned, against the governor. So what happens to his legal troubles? Let's set aside the impeachment inquiry for a moment now that he's stepping down.
Well, the cape of wearing of being the governor of New York, whether it's on him or not, doesn't impact him from a criminal standpoint as it relates to these specific allegations. So as far as the Albany County Sheriff's Office, which is looking into that criminal complaint that you mentioned, Savannah, involving an executive assistant in his office who has since come forward and spoken about what happened, that she was groped by the governor, the Albany County District Attorney's Office, along with the Sheriff's Office, they'll continue to look into that. Several of the other district attorneys' offices have come out and said, hey, we're going to still look into things. What you have outside of the Albany complaint that you referenced is a couple of different district attorneys' offices that looked at that AG's report, said, OK, there might be some things here that happen within our jurisdiction that we should look at and figure out whether or not there was a violation of criminal statute. So that's where those investigations stand.
And Danny, now the New York State Assembly hasn't backed down, though, from its impeachment inquiry. And we have to keep in mind all of the things that was related to this sexual harassment scandal, which we heard the governor address yet again yesterday, disputing most of those allegations, but also his book deal to see if federal funds were involved there, nursing home deaths and the miscounting of those, and the funding of the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And again, keeping in mind that impeachment is one of the main tools that it provides is the fact that it precludes somebody from being able to hold office again. So in your opinion, do you think that's going to move forward? And what work do they need to get done to actually write articles of impeachment?
If we were betting on it, the odds diminished significantly of impeachment once the governor announced he was stepping down. Now, in theory, they can still go through with it. We learned earlier this year, at least in the federal system, that an impeachment can move very quickly if the Senate and the House are motivated enough. And because impeachment really doesn't have the voluminous books of procedure that we have in court, it really is up to the individual politicians as to how fast they want it to move forward. And I would just add that by my statistics, the last elected governor of New York to not resign was George Pataki. Now, the great Tom Winter can fact check me on that, but I believe that's correct.
I heard he's right from our other mic. All right, Tom Winter and Danny Ceballos, as always, thank you for your expertise here.
MSNBC anchor Yasmin Vasugian joins us now from the state capitol in Albany. So, Yasmin, this resignation came with little notice yesterday. Many thought he was maybe going to keep fighting this for a bit longer. Do we know what the tipping point was for the governor?
I think, Joe, what we're hearing from some of the sources that I've been speaking to as well in my reporting up here, it's kind of been a confluence of factors, right? You think about the timeline leading up to what happened yesterday. You had the resignation of Melissa DeRosa, his top aide, someone who has been with him for a very long time, very much a part of his inner circle. That was kind of a signal as to the fact that even members of his inner circle were starting to abandon the governor. You had Brittany Camiso speaking with CBS News, obviously an accuser of the governor's, asking for him to step down. You had Roberta Kaplan, the chairwoman of Time's Up, stepping down from her position as well after advising Cuomo when these accusations first surfaced. And then you had the Speaker of the Assembly on Monday saying it's not going to be months. It's going to be weeks that we're going to be pursuing this impeachment process. So I think at the end of the day, the governor essentially was talking about the fact that he didn't have much time left and felt as if the time was now to resign. Here's what the governor had to say yesterday.
It is your best interest that I must serve. This situation, by its current trajectory, will generate months of political and legal controversy. That is what is going to happen. That is how the political wind is blowing. It will consume government. It will cost taxpayers millions of dollars. It will brutalize people.
So I think the question is now whether or not the Assembly is going to continue to pursue impeachment proceedings. Some folks of the Assembly, members of the Assembly that I've been speaking to, have said they want to continue. Others have wanted to stand down. So I think the next couple of days are going to kind of give us an indication as to what's going to happen there. Obviously, with Tom, you were talking about the criminal investigations that are still proceeding. But really, for the governor right now, in the next 13 days, he's got to find a place to live, Joe, because he has been living exclusively at the governor's mansion while he's been in office, and he really doesn't have anywhere to go. So we're going to see how things play out over the next couple of weeks with just 13 days left in office for this governor.
Yasmin, let's talk about the president's reaction. President Biden was asked about Cuomo's resignation yesterday. As we noted a moment ago, he said he respects the decision, but he was asked a number of questions, probably the last thing he wanted after the Senate passed the infrastructure deal. What else did the president have to say about it?
It was quite some timing, wasn't it, Joe? Right? I actually tweeted about this yesterday as I was anchoring the 2 p.m. filling in for Katie Tur. The fact that they were passing this massive bipartisan infrastructure deal in Washington at the same time as Governor Andrew Cuomo holding this press conference and announcing that he was resigning in 14 days' time. We know the president obviously had come out and said that the governor should, in fact, resign. He was, let's not forget, he was campaigning on behalf of this governor back in 2018 before he even decided to run for president. Nonetheless, of course, the president during his press conference yesterday, when kind of taking his victory lap or the beginnings of his victory lap for this infrastructure deal, asked about his reactions to the governor resigning. Here's what he had to say.
Thought he's done a hell of a job. And I mean, both on everything from access to voting, to infrastructure, the whole range of things. That's why it's so sad.
So here's the thing. There was a lot of back and forth. At the same time, he said, yes, this was the time for the governor to resign. But after he said it was a hell of a job, he had a little bit of a back and forth with reporters who said, wait, you think he did a hell of a job after 11 women accused him of sexual assault and harassment? He said, that's not the question you asked me. You asked me about how Cuomo dealt with infrastructure in his state, how he was governing in his state. This is my response to that. Do I think the governor should step down? Absolutely. I think the governor should, in fact, step down. And these women should very much be believed, especially after that damning 165-page report released by the Attorney General, Joe.
All right. Yasmin Evsugian reporting from Albany. Thanks so much.
Dr. Bob Lahita joins us now. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine and director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Lahita, thank you so much for being here. And I want to pick it up with what we just heard from that nurse describing the incredibly difficult last year and a half, specifically saying, I can't keep going. We know that one of the things that can stop so many people from ending up in the hospital is the vaccine. But let's talk about what can be done in these healthcare systems to take care of staff and combat burnout. If people are going to continue to be hesitant about the shot, what can be done to support our doctors and nurses?
Well, we can try to support our doctors and nurses, but remember, Savannah, there's only a limited number of intensivists and intensive care trained nurses. And you may recall in 2020 during the pandemic, we imported nurses from the West, from Colorado, from California. Now that the Delta virus has gone throughout the country, particularly in the Southeast and the Southwest, it's a big problem. I cannot believe that in this day, people are dying without vaccination. And it's extraordinary. It's emotional exhaustion. It's a feeling that you haven't accomplished anything because it's like being on a treadmill over and over, seeing the same kind of catastrophe, intubation, death, inability to have the patient talk to his or her relatives except through an iPad. I mean, can you imagine that? No. So it is emotionally draining.
Yeah, emotionally and physically, most certainly. Now, Doctor, where Ellison was there in Mississippi, the Department of Health for that state, last week's COVID numbers show that nearly 1,000 students tested positive for COVID, along with 300 teachers and staff across the state. So, of course, this is a concern as it's back to school season. Do those numbers surprise you, or do you think we're going to see similar trends as more students in more states head back to the classroom across the country? And then what's that going to mean? Schools closing again? What's going to keep kids safe?
Well, keeping kids safe, number one, will be having all of the teachers and ancillary staff vaccinated. And in fact, I think it should be mandated for school teachers and staffs in schools to be vaccinated, just like it's mandated for us healthcare workers in hospitals. You're dealing with kids that are unvaccinated below the age of 12, for example, and we're asking them all to wear masks. How realistic that is, I don't know. I don't think it's very realistic. And then above the age of 12, you've got a very volatile population of young people who depend on their parents' guidance to be vaccinated, and oftentimes their parents' permission to be vaccinated. And the parents don't believe in the vaccine, they're not going to get their kids vaccinated. And this is really a tragedy, because you're right. In the Mississippi school system, there's over 1,000 kids that are now positive, teachers that are positive. It is a mini pandemic of the unvaccinated in Mississippi, and that's a disaster.
Now, Dr. Lahita, President Biden has a new pitch for getting people vaccinated. It's specifically warning of the impact of the upcoming hurricane season on the fight against COVID. Let's listen to that first.
If you wind up having to evacuate, if you wind up having to stay in a shelter, you don't want to add COVID-19 to the list of dangers. The more we do to prepare, the better off we are when disaster strikes. We can't prevent hurricanes making landfall, but we can prevent people from getting seriously sick and dying from COVID-19.
So based on what we've seen so far, do you think that a message like that will be effective for people who are hesitant, or what more can be done at this point to reach them?
Well, Savannah, consider the disaster of having a hurricane come through and having everybody gather together in a school auditorium or a school cafeteria and coughing and sneezing on each other. The vast number of those people being unvaccinated, and then having a major breakout occur during a hurricane where the hospital may be impossible to get to, medications may not be available, and certainly staff may not be available. It's a combination and a formula for a complete catastrophe.
Dr. Bob, as always, thank you for joining us, even to discuss these really tough numbers. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And now, with students heading back to school around the corner and across the country, News Now is doing a deep dive to help you get a full perspective on what COVID could mean for kids and what parents need to know. Be sure to join Aaron Gilchrist and Morgan Radford for a special half hour titled Now in Focus, Children and COVID, this Thursday at 1:30, of course, right here on NBC News Now.
Most of the country is bracing for intense heat waves this week. Places like Philadelphia are expected to hit temperatures that could feel as hot as 110 degrees. That's forcing the National Weather Service to issue an excessive heat warning.
Experts say this kind of heat in major cities can be attributed to climate change and also something called the urban heat island effect.
NBC's Josh Letterman joins us now from Philadelphia, where it'll really heat up again today. Josh, even in the morning, I know it's humid, so thanks for being out there for us. You know, obviously it gets hot in cities like Philly during the summer, but this is the city's 5th heat wave in just a few months. Temps keep rising. How has the weather changed there over the last few decades?
Well, in a few words, Joe, it's gotten a lot hotter. You're now seeing 5 more days per year hitting 95 degrees or hotter than you did just in 1970. But one of the interesting things is you're seeing that summer days here in Philadelphia, they're now about 3 degrees hotter than they were about 5 decades ago. But the night times are 3.8 degrees hotter. In other words, the nights are getting hotter faster than the days are. And scientists tell us that's a result of the fact that in these cities, it's really hard for the city to cool down at night. You get this heat trapped, and it ends up really pumping temperatures up across the board.
And Josh, I mentioned this thing called urban heat islands. I know it's something that you've done some reporting on. So can you explain what this is that experts are calling that and what it means for the future of cities like Philadelphia?
Yeah, basically the way that we live in cities traps heat in the urban area and makes it harder for it to escape. So you've got less vegetation, less trees, less water that create moisture that cool things down. And then at the same time, you've got all this human-made material like concrete, pavement and rooftops that actually absorbs heat and then slowly re-emits it into the environment, as opposed to bouncing it off and sort of sending it back out toward the sky. And so as a result, you get this heat that's trapped in during the day. It slowly releases overnight, and it ends up really heating up the temperatures more in the urban areas than even in the areas surrounding it.
And Josh, we're seeing more and more of this, not just in the East and Midwest, even the Pacific Northwest. How can people best prepare for these heat waves?
Well, it's basic common sense. According to the National Weather Service, you want to make sure you're getting a lot of fluids during the day when you're in a heat wave. Also want to make sure to do things like checking on elderly neighbors and relatives who might need assistance during that time. Try to stay in areas that are air conditioned, stay out of the heat. And then, of course, you want to make sure to avoid leaving children or pets in vehicles in this weather or, frankly, in any other. Joe?
All right. Josh Letterman. Josh, thank you so much. Stay cool.
Thank you, Josh.
From a tropical storm warning in Florida to those major heat warnings across the East Coast, we're seeing extreme weather all over the country.
Bill Cairns is here to walk us through it all. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. It's amazing how many people are under heat warnings and advisories right now. I believe this is the highest number that we've seen so far this summer. So this is just about, the hottest day from coast to coast that we've seen. Heat warnings are in effect for much of the Pacific Northwest into Northern California, and from the Midwest to the Deep South to the Mid-Atlantic to the Northeast and New England. 133 million people impacted. We only have like 330 million people in this country, so we're over just about a third of the people in this country. The hottest days will be today and tomorrow, especially in the Northeast. So as far as the forecast goes today, the number on the right is the heat index today. D.C. will feel like 105, but how about the Midwest? St. Louis, 111. Memphis, 111. And then as we go throughout the end of this week, the peak of the heat will be on Thursday. D.C. has a chance of hitting 100 degrees. And when we factor in the humidity, that feels like temperature, even New York City will be 105, D.C. 108, but we're still the hottest in areas of the Midwest. Notice St. Louis there still feeling like 109. And then finally, we do still have to watch what's going to happen with Fred. It is approaching the Dominican Republic. And as we go throughout the next 2 to 3 days, it'll be near land, guys, so it's going to be kind of weak. It's not until we get to the weekend that it at least has a potential to get a little bit stronger. We'll have to wait and see if it happens, because this one's a pretty disorganized storm right now. So Florida, as of now, it's a wait and see.
All right, and we will be watching that with you all week. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yes.
Coming up, breaking news overnight, the Senate passes that huge multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill.
Yeah, that just hours after they passed the trillion-dollar bipartisan bill. What sort of hurdles do they both face once they reach the House for a final vote? We'll tell you. That's up next. On Capitol Hill, we're finally seeing major developments on two infrastructure fronts. After a 14-hour debate known as a vote-a-rama, the framework for the Democrats' $3.5 trillion human infrastructure plan passed early this morning along party lines via what's called budget resolution, which allowed Democrats to pass it without needing Republican support. This comes just one day after a rare coalition of Democrats and Republicans came together to pass the $1.2 trillion package to improve the country's roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. Both packages now head to the House, where their fate is uncertain. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now. Leanne, before this was even over, we got a reporting note from you at 2 a.m., so thank you for being up with us. Good morning. It's good to see you. So help us understand, walk us through the budget resolution process. What does that allow for? Where does it go from here? And then remind us which bill it was that we had to use that budget resolution process for.
Yeah, Savannah, good morning. So the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill for child care, elder care, paid family leave, all of the Democratic priorities for soft infrastructure is what this budget resolution is for. The Senate spent all night voting on amendments, actually not related to it, but it's part of the process to pass this with a simple majority of 50 votes. Now, this is just the first step in this process. Now that needs to go to the House of Representatives for them to pass it. And then the House and the Senate write the actual legislation. They fill in the details of this legislation when then both the House and the Senate have to vote on it again. And so when Schumer is talking about a two-track process, this is one track, this budget resolution for the $3.5 trillion that has many steps. And then the other track is the hard infrastructure bill that the Senate passed yesterday.
Yeah, so let's talk about that one, the bipartisan bill. It actually had the support of 19 Republicans. That's a major victory for President Biden. So tell us about what's in that package.
It really is. It's a big bipartisan victory. Something transportation is usually bipartisan, but it hasn't been over the last decade. There's a lot of money for roads and bridges, a ton of money for passenger rail, including Amtrak, including that Northeast corridor that the trains keep getting slower and slower. It's the biggest investment in broadband ever in history, and water infrastructure as well. The goal of removing every single lead pipe from schools and residences throughout the entire country. So this is a big development of infrastructure that has been declining over the past years, Savannah.
And now, Leanne, as you mentioned, though, these are not done deals. Both the bipartisan infrastructure package that you just outlined and that one that needed budget resolution now head to the House. So what kind of reception are we expecting? What hurdles do they face next?
Well, Speaker Pelosi says that she's going to take up the budget resolution. She's going to bring the House back later in August to do that. She's holding off on this bipartisan traditional infrastructure bill until all the many steps in the legislation is written in this human infrastructure bill. So we might not see a vote on final passage of the hard infrastructure bill or the human infrastructure bill until September or maybe even October, Savannah.
All right, Leanne Caldwell, it is wonderful to have a conversation with you about this with some real updates. Thank you so much. See you soon.
You're welcome.
Let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv. Hey, Raf, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. President Biden says he has no regrets about withdrawing U.S. forces from Afghanistan, even as the Taliban seizes more and more territory. The militants now control at least 8 out of 34 provincial capitals, and their widespread fears they'll eventually take over the whole nation. The president urged Afghan leaders to unite and fight for their nation. China is continuing a series of prosecutions of Canadian citizens in what critics are calling hostage politics. Canadian businessman Michael Spavor has been sentenced to 11 years in prison for spying. He was arrested in 2018, just days after Canada arrested a senior executive at the Huawei telecoms company. And finally, one Indonesian village has turned its trash into a robot to help fight COVID. The robot is made of pots, pans, and an old TV monitor, and is now being used to deliver food and supplies to villagers who are self-isolating. And guys, the robot's name, of course, is Delta Robot.
Oh, okay. Hey, it's pretty cool, though, the way that they did that, both for what its function is and how they made it. Look at that.
Recycling. All right, thank you, Raf.
And coming up, Beyonce and Jay-Z, pop music power couple, massively successful entrepreneurs.
And now the faces of one of high fashion's most iconic brands will tell you about their latest deal next. Beyonce and Jay-Z's, if they needed any more money, are the new faces of Tiffany & Company. The news was announced in the September issue of Harper's Bazaar, which features Beyonce on the cover. The icon turns 40 next month and told the magazine her wish is, quote, for the next decade to be fun and full of freedom. We'll have to wait for the couple's first ad for Tiffany's.
Her life seems pretty fun.
She's, yeah, I was going to say, is it not fun yet?
Yeah. Right?
She's not free.
Yeah.
Or she's not, having fun. But 40 will be great.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
It's amazing that she's going to be 40.
Yeah.
I mean, she looks awesome. Well, that's fun.
Great. All right. Time now for your weekly checkup.
And today, NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us on set to tell us about all the latest health headlines you may have missed. Dr. Azar, first, it's so good to see you in person.
So good to see you guys in person.
So good. Oh, my goodness. We're so happy to have you here. Okay, let's start with this one. A new study shows women are still being left out of clinical heart trials, which sounds kind of concerning because you'd think that that representation would be important. So what do we know about this one?
You would think it's important. And, this is the analogy I make. We say with pediatrics that it's not just medicine for little people.
And really the same concept applies to women in medicine.
and clinical trials. Women are generally underrepresented in clinical trials, particularly for heart disease. Some of the reasons why is because female doctors typically are more likely to recruit female patients. And generally speaking, females are underrepresented even as clinical trial leaders. And also a lot of women are pregnant or in their childbearing years, and so they're not going to participate in clinical trials, but it's incredibly important. So doctor's orders. I encourage every woman to speak to their doctor if they potentially have heart disease to see if their doctor or somebody else they work with is involved in clinical trials that they can participate with. And also, women, you can be your own advocate. Research yourself to see whether or not there's a clinical trial that might be open to you.
Wow. Those problems run deep there, though.
They sure do.
Oh, my gosh. All right.
All right, here's another study. It says that arthritis could be linked to higher rates of male infertility. What more can you tell us about that?
So this is interesting. You know, I'm a rheumatologist, and I have a conversation about fertility and family planning with my female patients all the time for obvious reasons. But infertility and you know, childbearing issues, family planning also is important for our male patients. So this study looked at over 600 men who have a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis and other kinds of inflammatory arthritis, and they basically wanted to see at what age were the men diagnosed. Was it before the age of 30, between 30 and 40, or over 40, and how did that relate to their rates of infertility, childlessness, and sperm quality? And guess what? Men who were diagnosed young, meaning before the age of 30, actually had issues with all of those metrics. Wow. So the doctor's orders here are if you are a male and you've been diagnosed with RA or another inflammatory arthritis, these are conversations that you should be having with your doctor, especially if you're having issues with fertility. And it's something, family planning in particular, to talk about earlier on, because some of the treatments that we use to treat RA and other conditions can affect a man's fertility.
Wow, that is so interesting.
I know.
I mean, what a good thing to know if you hear that diagnosis.
It's not just for
something
women.
else to check out. Absolutely. All right, now here's another really interesting one that I'm sure a lot of people will be excited to hear about. There's a promising new topical cream that could help with skin cancer.
With skin cancer. So this is a clinical, just a stage 2 clinical trial, so it didn't go all the way. I know everyone's familiar with this terminology now, but these researchers were looking at a treatment for basal cell carcinoma, which is the most common type of skin cancer. Fortunately, not like melanoma, doesn't have a high mortality, but the treatments right now, there are some creams that treat very superficial lesions, but a lot of the treatment involves these excisions, which can be expensive. It's surgery that can even be very disfiguring. So this is a gel that actually inhibits this particular enzyme. It's called histone deacetylase. That's not necessarily important, but it does absorb even into the deeper layers. So so doctor's orders, anybody can get skin cancer. I do encourage everyone to check your own skin as well as getting checked by the dermatologist. And of course, I have to say, before we close, SPF greater than 30 all year round, and avoid those peak sun times, 10 to 2, where the sun is the strongest.
Absolutely. That dermatologist checkup, though, is important. My dad just had something removed from his hand, but, caught it early with that checkup.
Yeah, no,
topical is always, if you can do topical instead of surgery, that's always a great option.
That's pretty amazing to hear about. Yeah. All right.
Good to see you, Dr. Azar. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to have you here. Hope you're back soon. Thank you so much.
All right. Coming up, home buyers aren't the only ones now getting into the bidding wars over property.
Yeah, renters are now competing against each other for the places they're hoping to make home. We'll take you behind the surge in real estate demand next.
The home rental market is heating up again, with demand surging in the last few months and prices ticking higher. The hunt for an apartment is becoming so fierce that there have even been reports of potential tenants getting into bidding wars. CNBC real estate correspondent Diana Olick joins us now with more on this. Good to see you, Diana. So why are we seeing so much demand for rental homes right now, and just how high are some of the rents going?
Well, it's all because the economy is improving, which means more people are moving out of shared situations. And we all know there was a housing shortage to begin with. Then there's, of course, the pricey housing market. So while there's big demand from home buyers, a lot of those buyers are getting priced out. That means they're going back into the rental market. And all that demand and short supply is pushing rents higher. In July, rents nationally rose 7% year over year for one-bedroom apartments, nearly 9% for two-bedroom apartments. And that's up from 5 and 6.5% gains in June. That's according to Zumper. And for single-family rental homes, the latest from CoreLogic in May shows rents up 6.6% year over year. That's nearly 4 times the annual increase that we saw in May of last year.
Yeah, that's a huge change. I know I was looking, granted, it was New York City last November, and it was deals galore. So obviously things are changing as we start to emerge from the pandemic. What does this mean for people who are looking to get a rental home?
2 words, bidding wars. We spoke to a landlord in Maryland who listed a home 2 weeks ago. He had 20 different people come through it and 10 applications. He says not only is the rent rising, but so is the profile of today's renter.
The rental applications that we're getting right now, you're seeing higher credit scores, you're seeing applicants willing to put down more in terms of security deposit. You're seeing strong rental history as well. That wasn't necessarily the case pre-COVID.
And he told us he's been doing this for over 20 years. He has never seen a rental market this competitive.
And Diana, this is all happening alongside the uncertainty surrounding the eviction moratorium. We know we have that new one that's more focused. How is that going to affect the rental market?
Well, it's just taking away from supply because you have a lot of landlords who have renters who haven't been paying for more than a year. In fact, the landlord we spoke to said he's out about $30,000, $40,000 at this point. So if they can't evict those renters, then they don't have space for new renters, and that just takes away from supply. So again, it's that supply and demand. You have a lot of people who want to get into the rental market, but they can't find anything, and those who can't afford to stay in it are not being evicted. And so that's a double-edged sword. We don't want them out on the street, but also we need that supply on the market for people who can't afford that.
All right, Diana, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. Appreciate your reporting.
A new concern is confronting officials and businesses trying to police proof of vaccination. The rise of fake vaccine cards being sold online. With so many universities and colleges requiring proof of the shot, there are reports some students may be trying to game the system. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has this story.
Hey, Joe and Savannah, yeah, good morning to you. It may surprise you guys to know that some young men in college have a tendency to get fake IDs to buy beer. I'm sure it was never something you guys participated in. But now with that going on, the concern is that some people may be trying to get a fake CDC COVID vaccine ID because they don't want to get the vaccine itself. That's led to concern among some school administrators, even some students, about whether it's important and whether they should now come down harder on a vaccine mandate. This fall, getting back to normal includes college students going back to campus. But with nearly 700 universities and colleges now requiring proof of vaccination, some administrators are worried about a new black market. Counterfeit certifications, some going for as much as $200.
The students who've spoken with me have been clear that they know exactly how they would get fraudulent vaccine cards and that they know students who have submitted these fraudulent vaccine cards.
The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, one of the schools requiring students to submit their proof of vaccination. As an alternative, some, like UNC, also offer the option for students to undergo regular testing. Junior Simon Palmori says he believes most of his classmates would not upload a fake card, but
it's really distressing to think that students that could be sitting behind me in class could be both unvaccinated and not being tested.
UNC tells NBC News it conducts periodic verification of documents, and no fraudulent entries have been found so far. It also notes that lying or falsifying documents could result in disciplinary action. But fake vaccination cards have been advertised online, like this Instagram user offering $25 per card, and this Telegram account with the tagline, "Protect yourself from the poisonous COVID-19 vaccines." The FBI used a public service announcement earlier this year to be on the lookout, warning against making or buying a fake card.
The unauthorized use of a government agency seal is illegal, and it is punishable by a hefty fine and/or up to 5 years in prison.
2 airline passengers entering Canada from the U.S. were recently fined nearly $16,000 each for using fake vaccination cards. It all comes as some cities and businesses are implementing their own proof of vaccination requirements for activities like dining indoors, going to gyms, or seeing shows.
We're trying to entertain folks. So I'm not saying anybody has to get a vaccine or a negative test, but if you don't, then you don't get to come to the show.
But for some in the restaurant industry already hard hit by the pandemic, frustration over having to police their customers' vaccination status.
To me, it seems like the government is trying to get around it by having small business do the enforcing that the government should really be doing.
Back on campus in Chapel Hill, Professor Chapman is hoping everyone takes the lessons learned from the pandemic to have a safe semester.
It means thinking about what those healthcare providers have gone through over the course of the last 18 months and not wanting to be a part of stressing them further.
Part of the problem is that these CDC cards are rather flimsy. They were not meant to last forever. By the way, if somebody were to try to alter or falsify a card using the CDC logo, that's punishable by up to a $5,000 fine and, believe it or not, even 5 years in prison. Guys, back to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Coming up, another round of relief from the Biden White House for those who are paying off student loans.
But this payment pause will apparently be the last, and now the pressure is on from some Democrats to cancel the debt altogether. That story next.
The Biden administration is extending the pause on student loan payments until February 2022, but the Education Department warns this will be the last time students are given that extra time to pay them off.
Nearly 42 million Americans are strapped with student loans as Democrats face mounting pressure to cancel the debt altogether. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez joins us now with more. So, Isa, what does this mean for borrowers?
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. These payments have been paused since back in March 2020, but this final extension means that come early next year, that relief is over, and some Democrats are pushing the White House to do more. Take a listen.
The repayment pause on student loans has been extended once again, a relief for over 40 million borrowers nationwide. After many rounds of payment pauses since March 2020, this extension into January of next year will be final, according to the White House. But some Democrats argue this can be taken one step further. A joint statement last Friday by Senators Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, and Representative Ayanna Pressley said, quote, "It doesn't go far enough. We continue to call on the administration to use its existing executive authority to cancel $50,000 of student debt," end quote. President Biden campaigned with ambitions to solve the student debt crisis.
I proposed and the House, Nancy, put it in the plan to immediately provide $10,000 in debt relief as stimulus right now.
On his first day in office, he extended the student loan payment pause to September. His administration then took other steps in March, streamlining the debt forgiveness process for more than 70,000 borrowers who claim misconduct by for-profit schools. Also adding relief for more than 40,000 borrowers with disabilities, and expanding the pause to more than 1 million borrowers with private loans. By taking these steps, President Biden has canceled about $1.5 billion of student debt so far, which may sound like a lot, but it's less than 1% of the total student debt held by the federal government. His bold promise upon victory last November hasn't yet been fulfilled.
The legislation passed by the Democratic House calls for immediate $10,000 forgiveness of student loan. It should be done immediately.
Democrats have been pressuring the president to offer a more progressive $50,000 forgiveness to each borrower. With the control of the White House and both chambers of Congress, Democrats face less bipartisan challenge, but they haven't reached an agreement on the proper path. Senators Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, and others on the left say those $50,000 can be waived to each borrower with an executive order.
President Biden, with a flick of a pen, can get this done.
They argue that the president's education secretary can execute the power to cancel student debt according to the Higher Education Act of 1965. Thus, the president can surpass Congress to make this happen. On the other hand, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi insists that it must follow the congressional process.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power.
Biden's answer to the $50,000 waiver is a hard no.
We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. I'm prepared to write off the $10,000 debt, but not 50. I don't think I have the authority to do it by sign of the pen.
A poll by Morning Consult in January found 56% of Americans were in favor of the $10,000 debt cut, higher than the 47% support for a $50,000 cancellation. Student loan forgiveness has a greater popularity among people of color, many arguing it can help close the racial wealth gap. Studies show that student debt weighs heavier on graduates of color in the long term, too. One 2019 study from Brandeis University found that 20 years after graduating, a typical white borrower has paid off 94% of their debt, while the typical black borrower still owes 95% of theirs. Whether President Biden and Democrats can deliver a substantial solution before the extended deadline and the midterm elections remains a question mark.
Earlier this year, I spoke with Black and Latino borrowers who have been strapped with their student debt for many years. They told me that that debt has dictated many of the career and life decisions that they've had to make. They haven't been able to provide for their families in ways that they've wanted to because of that. They haven't been able to build generational wealth that they so desperately want to build for their family, for future generations. And ultimately, they said that these payment pauses are just a Band-Aid. They want and need to see long-term solutions, especially after what has been a couple of tough years financially for them. Joe, Savannah.
All right. Isa Gutierrez. Isa, thanks so much. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.